I'm not gonna lie, it was a little bit of an emotional process writing this episode, and I did cry a couple of times. And in my gibberish vocabulary, the past tense of cry is crowed, so I crowed a couple of times. Now, before we get into it, I want to start off with a quote. Someone listening probably thought I was going to say, I'm going to start off with a prayer. You really thought. So this is a quote by Carl Jung, who we're going to talk about in this episode in a few moments. And he said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And with that, hello. Welcome, everyone. A quick reminder, if you want to sign up for my twice monthly newsletter, it's called the Body Brief. Link is going to be in the show notes, and it's going to be literally a 1-minute read on a very specific patriarchy hack or topic or life hack or whatever mindset shift that I've discussed in a previous episode that you probably forgot about. So sign up if you so choose. Now, let me tell you something. We all have two parts to us. We have the light part that we show the world, and we have the dark part that we hide. And because we live in this hellish gray world where as we get older, our boundless dreams and ambitions and individuality and color gets painted over with that gray brush, a lot of the grayness that gets painted into us is actually traits from our shadow, from our dark side, that we repress. Because as we're socialized and we hear from parents and teachers and friends and family members that you shouldn't do this, or this trait is not good, or you shouldn't act like that, you shouldn't say that, and we get guilted and shamed into taming parts of us that we think are now undesirable traits that we should not show the world, those get pushed into our shadow, into our dark side. So on that spooky note, let's hit the theme song. DJ, let's go. Remember how I mentioned our friend Carl Jung at the beginning of this episode? Let's talk about him a little bit. So, as with any man who I discuss on this podcast, whether he is a historical figure, or a psychologist like Carl Jung is, we have to play smash or pass. So, Carl Jung, smash or pass, I would say when he was young, not to be confused with Carl Jung, he was kind of a pass, but as he got older, you guys, I don't know what it is, he kind of became a smash. So I don't know if you feel the same way, let me know. Maybe this is just really sick and twisted of me, but anyway. All right, now that that important stuff is out of the way, let's talk about a psychological phenomenon that he discovered, which is that of the shadow. So, according to Carl Jung, the shadow is the unconscious part of our psyche that we deny and we suppress because of our upbringing and what society tells us is acceptable versus unacceptable, and also based on the way that we create our own self-image. There's parts of our identity that become suppressed. And they're not all necessarily bad traits that end up in our shadow. It could be things like ambition or self-prioritization, which are good, or it can also be bad traits like jealousy, rage, insecurity, revenge, envy, all that kind of crap. For the purpose of this episode, I'm going to call the shadow the demon, and I'm going to say this word 100 times over the next 25-30 minutes. So hopefully by the end of this episode, the word demon will not have that scary, spooky connotation to it anymore, and it's just going to be a part of us that we're going to learn to accept. Okay? Let's talk a little bit more about our demons. Basically, our demon is the part of us that contains all the things that didn't fit into the idea of the person that we're taught to be. So it could be a form of self-sabotage because, well, not that it could be. It is a form of self-sabotage because we're repressing a huge part of who we are and what we feel. And like the quote that I shared at the beginning from Carl Jung, pass when he was young, smash when he's old, he says that if we keep suppressing the shadow and keeping it in our unconscious, it's going to take control of our life and we're just going to call it fate. And that's the thing with the shadow or our demons, is that when you ignore your demons, they're still going to creep out and leak out into your behavior. It's just going to be in a way that you don't control, especially if you are triggered by stress or by some kind of triggering event. You're going to see parts of your demons leaking out. And the thing is, most people go their whole lives repressing their demons and basically living as half of themselves. Now, the thing about me is that I have created an alter ego out of my demons, and her name is Nika Farrell. I actually have a necklace that says Nika Farrell that I was going to wear today, but it doesn't go with my outfit, so we'll wear it some other time. But Nika comes out in some of my episodes. She's probably going to come out at some point today, but that's what I've done. I've accepted my demons, and I've created something out of her, and she has a name, even though the name is one letter different from my actual name. So let's talk about the relationship between your demons and using the patriarchy's loopholes to your advantage. The entire patriarchy is the manifestation of the demon that many men have. It's literally the embodiment of some of their deepest insecurities, like their fear of rejection, their envy for things that they don't have, like a uterus, Venus envy, as somebody in my comment section called it, which I love. Because literally your vagina is like a bouncer for the earth, right? It is the portal into the world. What are some other insecurities? Their need for validation through dominance and control. So we basically live in a system that was created based on the demon that many men have. We live in this demonic world, basically. And because of culture and society, which are informed by very rigid standards of how you should act and behave and carry yourself based on your gender, we are faced with a double whammy. Whammy number one is that a lot of women have similar demons because our repression manifests itself as niceness a lot of the time. The nice girl is selfless, agreeable, kind, fair. She makes herself the object of somebody else's life. She's not confrontational. She ties her self-worth to validation that she gets from other people. We are raised to be nice little girls. We have to be good girls. So what happens is that we have to repress a lot of the traits that actually help us to succeed in this world. And then while girls are being socialized with this crap, boys are being socialized in a different way because they are taught to be loud and assertive and to claim what's theirs. Not to say that there aren't harmful things that they're taught too, like repressing their emotions, but the different things go into their demons. And anyway, this isn't about freaking men. This is about us, okay? So all that to say, whammy number one is that a lot of women have similar demons because they have to be the nice girl and they repress a lot of traits that would have actually made them very successful in this unfair, misogynistic world. Whammy number two is that because we are socialized to be nice, we actually auto-repress the traits that help us succeed. So the system doesn't even have to repress those traits for us. It just does its little thing when we're being raised a certain way and socialized into these norms and values. And then we just auto-repress. We suppress these traits on autopilot. And so what happens? We become the version of the woman that keeps the system alive. We're basically oiling the wheels of the patriarchy. We become predictable. We become easily controllable, easily manipulated. And a really common example of this is how so many men speak over women. If you've been in a meeting with men, if you've been in literally a conversation with a man, you've probably experienced this. I experienced this a lot when I used to work in a corporate job. The reason, or one of the reasons why men easily interrupt and speak over women so much is because we've repressed that assertiveness trait. And because so many women have repressed that, we are predictable because most men know that if they enter a conversation with you and you're saying something and they want to interrupt you, they're going to have the easiest time in the world doing that. They're not going to encounter any opposition. So all of this serves as a way to make us easily controllable. I don't want to sound like a wackadoodle when I say this, but it's true. And this nice girl archetype, it goes hand in hand with a lot of false beliefs that we've been taught. And I like to call these false beliefs superstitions. So that's what we're going to call them from now on. These are superstitions. Like the superstition that if I'm fair and nice, then I'm going to be treated fairly and nicely. And I really think that I need to do an episode on why we need to throw away this whole concept of fairness, because it just does not do us any favors. And if you look at history, people, and by people I mean men, people have started wars because they couldn't come to terms with their demons. On the flip side of that, people have also started revolutions and social movements because they've learned to use their demons productively. So this law is all about how to understand the common traits that the system with a capital S, has forced us to repress, and for us to come to terms with our demons so that we can understand them and make them work for us. The system loses power over you when you've already accepted the things that it could have weaponized. So your demons only have power over you if you're scared of them. And deep down, as people and as a society, we crave very deeply to know our demons. And that's why people consume so much media and content about other people's demons, like these serial killer shows or true crime documentaries. People love that sort of stuff. Or people who are following certain political leaders whose personalities basically mirror that of their demons. I'm talking about one Cheeto in particular. The example I want to talk about today is different from the other ones that I've spoken about on previous episodes because I'm going to use myself as the example. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a backstory of how this podcast even started. So I used to be a very angry person. I used to be super angry, and that anger always lived. It was definitely part of my demons that I suppressed, and it was always just simmering just beneath the surface. So it really only took a small thing to trigger it, and then I would lose control. And a huge part of that anger was informed by my resentment of myself for being a woman, because I thought that since we live in this fucked up world, this unfair misogynistic world, being a woman doomed me to a terrible fate, that I'm already disadvantaged because I'm a woman, and that made me have a victim mindset for a very long time. New character unlocked, Victimella. I was actually thinking about this a few days ago because I keep talking about people who are victims and have a victim mindset, and I'm like, we need to give her a name. So victims of the world, we're going to name them Victimella. So I was Victimella for a very, very long time. That anger was what fueled Victimella, but it was informed by sadness, because fundamentally I was sad. I was heartbroken that we live in this world where women are just treated like crap. We live in a world where women don't, in a lot of places, don't have control over their own bodies. Or the fact that when I walk down the street, I'm scared. Like, my biggest fear is getting raped. My biggest fear is not getting killed, it is getting raped. Like, we live in a world where I have to be scared for my safety. My first instinct when I get into my car is to immediately lock the doors. When I used to take the subway to commute to work, I was scared every single moment of being on the subway. When I stood at the station waiting for the train, I would have my back to the wall so I can see all around me and to make sure that I did not get pushed onto the tracks, because there were a huge series of assaults against women in Toronto, of men literally assaulting women at subway stations. And then that's just my experience, but looking at other women in other parts of the world where they don't even have a quarter of the rights that we have, not because the West was so generous in granting us rights, but because women fought for those rights to stop being withheld from us by men in power. it breaks my heart. Like, we live in a world where in many cultures and countries, to be born with two X chromosomes is basically one of the worst things that can happen to you. And so that just made me really, really angry and really heartbroken that we have to live in a world like this. And I'm lucky because I'm not born in a culture where I have to get married at a young age and have kids and basically live my life in servitude to men, into a culture that just wants to repress and control me. But in a way, we all do, just in different forms. And just that made me a very angry person. And for a really long time, that anger was just a big part of my demons that I didn't have any control over. And once I started to change my relationship with myself, which then was mirrored in the way I saw the world, I realized that I don't have to live as victimella. I don't have to live with this anger and have that be the guiding emotion in a lot of my actions and in the way that I see the world. Because the way that you see the world basically determines the world that you're living in, right? If you see the world as this horrible, terrible place, then that's exactly how you're going to see it. And that's exactly how you're going to experience it. So I decided to turn that all around and do something productive out of it. And so that's why I started making these girly laws of power, because I realized the system, it's not going to change. The world we live in, it's not really going to change, at least not in our lifetimes. That's what I believe. But we can manipulate the system and find loopholes that we can exploit and find ways that we have been brainwashed so that we can unlearn that garbage and basically create a reality for ourselves that we are happy with and take control. Because at the core of my anger was a sense of helplessness. And so that's how this podcast was born. Victimella died. Nika Farrell was born. And that's not to say that that heartbreak is not there. It's something I feel every single day. And that's something that I use to create my content and write my episodes. And I use that as a way to guide myself, because when I feel very deeply about something, that's when I am able to find solutions and find clever, sneaky little ways of turning those emotions into something productive. So there you go. That is a little story time of how this podcast was born and how we became friends. All right, if you listen to my previous Law 18, you're going to know the drill. For this part of the episode, we're going to talk about mindset, action, and challenge. First things first is the mindset shift that you need to make and the things that you need to unlearn so that you can actually mentally be in a state where you can put your demons on your payroll. So the first thing to understand is that most of us are living as a version of ourselves that we didn't create. You're living as who you think you ought to be based on what society, parents, teachers, friends, culture have told us. And that is one of the main reasons why a lot of people don't even like themselves to begin with, because they're not living on their own terms. The second mindset shift is that you have to understand that your demons are not a bad thing. So don't demonize your demons. Obviously, our demons do contain some traits that can be very toxic or harmful, like anger, if used incorrectly, or rage, even jealousy, envy, revenge. Like, these are all things that could be very harmful. But then we also have, especially as women, a lot of traits that we're repressing that could be very helpful, like ambition, selfishness, or self-prioritization, all that sort of stuff, which we're going to talk about soon. So think of it this way: befriending your demons is actually an act of self-respect and self-acceptance, because by doing that, you are actually accepting all parts of yourself, not just the parts that are light. And that's huge because you are creating a version of yourself on your own terms. In this gray hell world that we live in, most people, the last time that they were able to create a version of themselves on their own terms was when they were just a little tiny baby, a little babe, or just a child, before the shame and guilt and crap and all these things that were meant to tame us came into play and basically painted us over with this gray brush and made us lose our color. That was the last time most people were the person that they wanted to be. So when you befriend your demons, you create a version of yourself on your own terms, and that is a huge way to take control. That's how you literally become the CEO, so you can put these motherfuckers on your payroll to begin with. And inherent in that sense of control is that you are internalizing that control. You're not externalizing it and blaming the world and having the same victim mentality as Victimella, because you realize that the only person who is allowed to have control over your life and your identity is you. A lot of people have the tendency to turn outwards when they become aware of their flaws and the issues that they experience, and they blame the world. That is a way to completely relinquish control and basically put your fate in the hands of the world or society, which is like the stupidest thing you can do. The third mindset shift that I want you to make is to understand that everything has a memory. And this is a little bit of an abstract concept, and it's really interesting when you think of it. So this is actually something that came to my mind when my piano teacher a couple of weeks ago showed me a YouTube short in the middle of our lesson. And it was basically a video of this musician, and he had these grains of sand on a table or a surface. I don't know exactly what the surface was, but he had these grains of sand on the surface, and then he played a note on the violin. Let's say, for example, he played the key A. He played A on the violin, and then the sand would form into a shape, let's say a star, for example. And then he would play another note, let's say E. He'd play E on the violin, and then the sand would form into a different shape, for example, a heart. And then he'd go on the piano and then play the same note that he played initially. Let's say he played A on the violin and it formed a star in the sand. He played A on the piano and then it formed a star in the sand. He played E on the piano like he did on the violin, and again, the same shape formed, the heart. And so everything has a memory, and that shapes the way that it behaves. Water has a memory in the same way that the sand had a memory. You have a memory. And I'm not just talking about like your short-term and long-term memory. I'm talking about the way that your body and your unconscious mind hold on to things like experiences, traumas. So that just goes to show again that your demons are always going to be a part of who you are. And that makes it all the more important to integrate them into your conscious self, and for the purposes of this law, treat them as your employees. So with the mindset out of the way, now let's talk about action. Now, there's a few things that you can do, and I'm going to go through these kind of quickly because there's one main action that I want to focus on. The first thing you can do is to understand and heal your inner child. So that's going to be basically a way of you becoming colorful again and rejecting this grayness that we've all been painted with. This reminds me of that trend that was going around social media a few months ago of that letter to your 18-year-old self. And I feel like that was a very healing process for a lot of people. I did that myself, and I literally cried so much writing that letter to my 18-year-old self. But that is a very powerful activity that you can do because we really haven't been whole since we were very young. Now, I'm not going to get into how to do any inner child healing because I am not qualified in that, but there's a lot of work that you can do on your own in terms of meditations, affirmations, exercises, all sorts of stuff that you can do. Now, there are some people whose childhoods were too traumatic for them to revisit on their own, and so obviously therapy is an option. I mean, literally for everyone. The second thing you can do, which is again on the theme of reflecting on your childhood, is to understand the life trap or the schema that you fall under. So if you haven't heard of life traps or schemas, a life trap is basically the way that we recreate traumas that happened during our childhood. There's 11 different life traps. I don't remember all of them, but there's entitlement, subjugation, mistrust and abuse, unrelenting standards. There's 11 of them. So there's actually a quiz that you can take. If you Google life trap quiz, it'll probably be the first result that comes up, but I'll leave the link in the show notes because I want to make sure that you guys are doing the right quiz. Understanding your life traps is also a really interesting way of understanding the behaviors and the patterns in your life that are holding you back from realizing your full potential. And a lot of them come with emotions that you are more likely to suppress. Life traps are also basically a way that a lot of people recreate daddy issues. So it's a really interesting and insightful aspect of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. I will leave the link in the show notes for the quiz, but I can't really speak too much on these things because I am not a trained psychologist or therapist. What I do want to focus on, though, is the third action you can do, which is to put your demons on your payroll. And what I want to do now is actually go through 5 emotions or traits that most women are taught to suppress. And I'm going to give them job titles, and I'm going to give them a role description, and I'm going to discuss how you can actually turn them around and make them serve you. So let's do that now. The only thing is that this is not an exhaustive list. This is just an example of more common traits that we suppress. My intention here is to give you an idea of how to understand these traits or other traits that might not be listed here, and how to start thinking about them so that you can use them in a productive way. So I literally printed it out, and obviously my printer, in the way that a printer normally behaves, does not print when you ask it to. All right. First trait is anger. Now, the job title we're going to give her is the general counsel. Her description is that anger alerts you to injustice, exploitation, abuse, and when something crosses your boundaries. So the thing about anger is that we've been taught to repress it for a very long time because it is unfeminine, it's bitchy, it violates the nice girl archetype. If a woman expresses anger, she's just an asshole. And also, at the end of the day, anger can be a very painful and destructive emotion that, if channeled incorrectly, can cause a lot of harm. Now, what Miss Anger, our general counsel, is going to help us to do is she's going to help us understand the things that really matter to us, because we are angry because of something we care so deeply about, and we can't stand to feel helpless against whatever that thing is that is making us so angry. So we can use our anger to guide us towards the things that matter to us the most, and we can channel that anger into creating something or contributing to a cause or doing something productive that channels that angry energy into an end result that gives us the sense of control rather than that helplessness that is making us more angry. So that's exactly what I did with this podcast, for example. Because let me tell you, controlled anger can be one hell of an emotion when you use it correctly. Okay. And that response can actually calm you down, because then you feel like you have a lot more control than you even realized. So use your anger as your general counsel. The next trait is envy. This is my favorite song by Nicki Minaj, is Envy. Envy, all they do is envy. Don't they know what's in me? Don't they know I'm coming back swinging for that envy? Why would they offend me? Why they go against me? So your envy is going to be your director of product strategy. Basically, her job is to reveal the things that you want most. Now, a very important clarifying point that I have to make here is the differentiation between envy and jealousy, because these are two terms that people use interchangeably, and a lot of the time people use the word jealousy to actually mean envy. So envy is wanting something that someone else has. Jealousy is the fear of losing something that you already have. So if you're at the gym, for example, and you see a woman with a really nice physique, maybe you feel envy towards her. If that woman starts talking to your boyfriend, now you feel jealousy. Okay, so when we're talking about envy, we're talking about things that other people have that we want. And envy is a very normal human emotion. Everybody feels envy. But in the world that we live in a patriarchy, women are taught to compete against one another. And that is rooted in envy and in a scarcity mindset. If you've ever worked in a workplace with like a middle-aged, miserable woman who wants to drag you down, you'll know exactly what this means, because a lot of women are brainwashed into thinking that they have to compete against each other. So the way to make your envy serve you as your director of product strategy is to study what triggers you. Okay, because envy is one of those things that we feel for like a split second and then it goes away, but it doesn't really go away. It goes away because we suppressed it. So it's still there, but it's kind of like embarrassing. Like, we don't want to be like, oh my God, I said that because I was envious of her. Like, no one's ever going to admit to feeling envy. So, what our director of product strategy is doing is she's reverse engineering envy into ambition. So, you can let that actually guide your growth and your pursuit towards your goals. Because when you're envious of someone, it means that they have something that you want. And underlying envy is often this sense of inferiority that we have, because as social beings, we always want to compare ourselves to other people. And when we see somebody having something that we want, that we think is unachievable for us, we tend to feel inferior, and we also feel really, helplessness. But as we saw with anger, guys, am I stupid? Like, why can't I talk? Helplessness is a way to make us feel even worse about ourselves. And a lot of the time, people try to justify things by externalizing them, right? That's what victimella does. So we see somebody have something that we want, we feel envy towards them, and then we might dismiss it and be like, oh, well, they were just lucky, or they just had rich parents, or if I was hot or skinny or rich or blah, 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 like she was, then I would be like that too, but I don't. And so people become slaves to their envy because they just relinquish all control, and they doom themselves to a life of helplessness and inferiority. So make sure you're letting your envy guide you towards the things that you want, and use her productively. Now, I know I talked about how we can reverse engineer our envy into ambition, and now I actually want to talk about another trait, which is ambition. So you can use our ambition on our payroll as our growth strategist, okay? And her job is to help you reclaim your birthright to success and help you realize your life's purpose, okay? Because ambition is a great trait. My Hogwarts house is Slytherin and Ravenclaw. I'm literally, like, when I take the quiz, I'm split evenly between both. So I am bisexual in terms of my Hogwarts house. But what is the motto of Slytherin? It's pride, ambition, cunning. But I know that in the books, like, everybody who's part of Slytherin is a Death Eater, so their families are basically just like rich, racist people. But the real Slytherins out there in the world are very high achievers and very ambitious people, okay? Anyway, what happens with ambition is that it is often shamed, especially in women. It is shamed as greed and arrogance. A lot of the time we're told that it is unnatural for us to be very ambitious in our careers, in our sports, in our lives, because our trajectories are already determined for us, right? We have to be nurturing. We have to be mothers first. And that's like, we can't be ambitious if that's going to impede on our God-given role of being a mom. But if you listen to my episode with Abigail from last week, you'll know that that is not the trajectory that a lot of women are taking, and that it in itself is a huge patriarchy hack. So your ambition is actually your rejection of everything that the system wants you to be. It wants you to be small, humble, non-threatening, non-confrontational. She's your refusal to be grateful for fuck-ass crumbs. Okay, so let your ambition help guide you in your path to realizing the success that you deserve to have. Because it is not greedy, it is not arrogant, it is not any of those things. It is literally your birthright to be ambitious and to give yourself, or to build for yourself, a life that you want to live. Because, like, that's literally, like, why else are we here? To live a life that we enjoy and that we've built for ourselves on our own terms. Next trait is insecurity. This reminds me of another song that I really like. This one is from the 80s, from Stacey Q. It's literally called Insecurity. Insecurity, why don't you give your love to me? I don't know how many of you guys are going to know that song, but yeah, the 80s are like my favorite decade for music and for TV, because like the Golden Girls was my favorite show of all time, and I freaking love 80s music. I literally listen to it even in the gym. I love it. Anyway, your insecurity is your quality control specialist. Okay, I freaking love this one. This is my favorite trait that I came up with. And what your quality control specialist is doing is she's keeping you accountable for areas of improvement while filtering out nonsense, okay? Because not every area needs to be like honed and improved and perfected. The thing about insecurity is that a lot of the times it shows us how society has trained us to doubt ourselves. But the thing about doubt is that it isn't a truth. Doubt isn't a truth, it is a tool. It can be either a tool to control you, or it can be a tool to help you self reflect. Okay. But the default with the system that we live in is to use doubt as a tool to control you. For example, when I started my master's, I had huge imposter syndrome because all my classes were split with PhD students. So these were classes of like 10, 15, 20 people. And like half of them will be PhD students who have been studying this for years. And they're literally becoming experts in the topics that I'm just now starting to learn about. And so I had huge imposter syndrome. Like I would sit in class and I would be so afraid to participate because I was just scared of saying something dumb, or I just felt like I didn't belong there. So anything I said would be dumb because, like, what do I know? And so that's an instance of where I used doubt as a tool to control myself, and I didn't realize my full potential. And I spent a lot of time in class listening to other people but not contributing myself, even though I probably had some pretty good ideas to share, because I was debilitated by that imposter syndrome. And the thing about insecurity is that most things that you're insecure about are probably things that you were once told you had to be insecure about. Like, it's basically the patriarchy's voice in your head. And I'm sure, for example, like with my imposter syndrome, that was a reflection of a lot of that nice girl conditioning that I had to, that I learned and then I had to unlearn, that was doing its thing and basically keeping me quiet and small. So let your insecurity be your quality control specialist and help you quiet that stupid patriarchy's voice that is in your head. The last trait I want to talk about is assertiveness. So let's call her the COO, and her job is to basically drive decision making and self advocacy. Similar to a lot of the other traits that I talked about, we are conditioned to repress our assertiveness because, again, it's unfeminine if you're speaking your mind, or it's very aggressive, or you're bitchy, or you're bossy. And this is, again, a way to just keep women non-threatening, because if you're just some loser who accepts everything and can never speak your mind and lets people walk all over you, then of course you're non-threatening. You're basically a doormat for everybody else to walk all over. And that's great. That is literally great for other people. That is a asshole's dream. So the thing about your assertiveness, your COO, is that you want to treat her like your guardian angel, okay? Because she knows what's best for you, and she just wants to make sure that you get it. Like, she's just there to make sure that you get everything that you deserve, just like your ambition. And the thing about your assertiveness is that she'll actually earn you respect, because people respect somebody who stands up for themselves. People don't respect doormats. People don't respect nice girls. People like being around these types of women because they're easier to manipulate and control and use, but they don't respect them. And that's why it's so easy for them to manipulate, control, and use them in the first place. So when you stand up for yourself, when you make your voice heard, when you say, like, no, this is not something that I'm jiggy with, this is not something that I can agree with, blah, 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 then people realize very quickly that you are not a person who can be pushed around. You're not a person who can be manipulated, and they will actually respect you for it. So let that COO, Miss Assertiveness, help you in that, because she is your guardian angel. She just wants what's best for you. Now, those were the 5 common traits that a lot of women are taught to suppress, and basically that's how we can put them on our payroll. Okay, so start thinking of these traits like that. I know that you have lots of traits that were not on this list, so start thinking of them as, what is their job title? What is their job, their role description, and how can they serve you? And also start thinking about how you have to unlearn certain brainwashing and superstitions that you've been taught that actually repress these traits and are actually functioning in a way that is very counterproductive to you realizing your potential and living life on your own terms. Now, let us talk about our challenge. So, I challenge you, ladies, to be aware of an instance where you're repressing your demons and figure out, like, what exactly is this trait that I am repressing? How does it manifest itself when I am repressing it and it leaks out? And how can I put her on my payroll? Okay, just with one trait. So maybe you feel like a very quick flicker of envy when somebody shares good news with you, for example. Or maybe you feel anger at something and then you end up making a passive aggressive remark and you realize, like, oh my God, this is me like repressing my anger. Do that with one trait. And then once you get in the habit of it, it's going to be easier to do it with other traits. And of course, y'all like share these with me. I'm not even kidding. Like one of my favorite things to do is just read the messages and comments I get from you guys of how you're using my content and how it's helping you, because it makes me feel so happy that like if one woman benefits from what I say, I am happy. I have done my work. All right, it is reversal time. What I will say here is that a lot of the time, we have to present some of these traits in a feminine way to avoid backlash or to avoid being stereotyped as something, to avoid it being counterproductive for us. Because we can't just do the same thing that men do and assume that we can get away with it. Because, for example, a woman who might be very assertive in the same way that a man is going to be labeled as a bossy bitch. So that's like I've made a lot of episodes about how to disguise these traits in feminine ways. So take a look at those if you haven't. But we just have to be aware of that. So we can't just go around showing these emotions just in their raw form, because as women, we have to learn how to play the game and present them in a feminine way. And that will ensure that we get the outcome that we want. Now, we have reached the end of this episode, and reminder to subscribe to the Body Brief if you feel like you forget a lot of the stuff that I talk about and you want to get a little bit of a reminder of just small, digestible, bite-sized pieces that will take you like 1 minute to read. Link is going to be in the show notes. Link for the Life Trap quiz is also going to be in the show notes. And in the meantime, don't forget that you are the baddest bitch in any building that you step foot in. All right, until next time, stay bad. Love you. Bye. Envy, all they do is envy. Don't they know what's in me? Don't they know I'm coming back swinging for that envy?